Good morning and welcome to the Blue Economy webinar series. My name is Corinne Lynds and I'm the content director here at Actual Media. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion where we'll be talking about plastics and fresh water. Before I jump in and introduce today's panelists, I'll give you a quick tour of our Crowdcast platform. By now, you've probably noticed a few people checking in along the right-hand side of your screen with the chat feature. Please say hello, let us know where you're from. Right above the chat, you'll see an Actual Media icon. If you click follow, you'll continue to be updated on our Blue Economy series as new webinars are announced. And down below, you'll see a variety of information. You can see how many people are signed into today's webinar. You'll see the polls feature where we encourage you to cast your votes. You'll also see a little green button that will link to the speakers' websites, so be sure to check those out as well. And most importantly is the Ask a Question feature. So don't be shy about becoming part of the conversation. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible as we go throughout. Last month, we had a really interesting conversation about advancing municipal co-digestion. If you missed that conversation, it is still available for replay on Water Canada's events page. And today, we've got a powerhouse panel of speakers lined up. But before I introduce them, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the many First Nations and Indigenous peoples of Canada as the original stewards of this great country. I'm in Toronto, which is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We all share in the responsibility of our natural infrastructure, and there is much we can learn from the traditional knowledge of the land, water, and materials that allow us to build projects that benefit all Canadians. All right, so let's get started and meet today's experts. I'm going to begin by inviting each of our panelists to the screen. Once they're on screen, I'll have them spend a few minutes to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about where they're from, what their role is, and what perspective they bring to today's conversation. First up, we have Anna Posacka from Ocean Diagnostics. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer.
Just one second, Anna. We're going to just bring everybody up to screen, and then we're going to do intros properly. So Suja Sukumaran from Thermo Fisher, you're up next. Good morning.
Good morning.
And then we have Chris Hilkene from Pollution Probe and the Great Lakes Plastic Cleanup. Good morning, Chris. And then we have Jesse Vermaire from Carleton University. And we were also going to have, good morning, Jesse. And we were also going to have John Coyne, who was planning to be part of the discussion today, but unfortunately had a conflict come up at the last minute and won't be able to join us. So now, Anna, I'm going to hand it over to you and ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're bringing to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. I'm just so eager to start the conversation. It's a very exciting conversation to have. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Ocean Diagnostics. We are a company with a strong social environmental mission, and that is to help address the ever-growing issue of plastic pollution in the environment. We're also tackling biodiversity loss, and we do so through technology, lab analysis, citizen science tools, and data solutions. My background is in microplastic pollution research. So I've been looking at that issue for the past 4 years and really have investigated that problem from a variety of angles, starting from material design to all the way to microplastic retention and emission via wastewater treatment facilities and their fate in the environment, including the Arctic ecosystem. So I'm pleased to be here and share some of the insights from that work and my perspective on the role of technology and municipalities in addressing plastics. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I was going to pass to Suja, but I think maybe I'll go to Chris next, just give her a second to get settled there.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Hilkene, Pollution Probe. And located here in Toronto, we are Canada's oldest environmental organization. And we've been working on water issues since about 1972. And we've learned our work from the Great Lakes in conjunction with a number of partners, including the Council of Great Lakes Region, in 2018 with Plastic Fund, which was really taking a look at science of Great Lakes plastics. And last year we launched a thing called the Great Lakes Plastic Cleanup, which is the largest initiative of its kind in the world to use technology to capture plastic that's in the water or its way to the water, to analyze that and use the findings to engage communities as well as policymakers, makers, actions to end pollution or plastic pollution.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Okay, Suja, you are up next.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I'm just like Anna mentioned, I'm super excited to talk to and hear about everybody's perspective too. So a little bit about myself. I am the senior application scientist for Thermo Fisher. I'm based out in San Jose, California. And I am a spectroscopist by training and education, as well as a biophysicist. My journey into the plastic pollution as well as the microplastics started almost 6 years ago when I visited California State University Channel Islands, which was when I, for the first time, saw some of these students isolate these particles from some marine organisms. Since then, it has been a great journey for the last 6 to 7 years, like collaborating and working with all the researchers in this area and working for development of the best analysis techniques, but at the same time, also bringing a lot of the researchers together for us to understand what would be the best way to work through this. And I'm here to talk or discuss the technical aspects of analyzing these plastic pollutants. So yeah, really looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Suja. Okay, Jesse, you're up.
Okay, hi, my name is Jesse Vermaire, and I'm an associate professor of geography and environmental studies at Carleton University in Ottawa. And I'm myself and my students in my lab are conducting research on microplastics in freshwater ecosystems and how they get there. And I should say I'm filling in on this panel for Dr. Danu Ormesi, who's with environmental engineering at Carleton and the head of the Global Water Institute. She wasn't able to make it today, but I'm really happy to be here. And the Global Water Institute is building, a lot of expertise around microplastics in the environment with help from funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada, for example, which helped support this panel today, and their Zero Plastic Waste Initiative. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you and welcome. All right, so let's dive in. Well, there's been a significant amount of focus placed on the plastics that end up in our oceans. We also need to consider the amount of plastic pollution that's entering our freshwater. And if judging by the reception to this panel today is anything to go on, I think it's a topic that a lot of people are very interested in. It's generally recognized that the mismanagement of plastic waste has led to plastic entering our environments, and more specifically our freshwater systems. To set the stage for our discussion today, I'd like to start with how big is the current challenge we're facing and get a scope of how is the plastic getting in the water? What are the impacts on the environment, people as a result? So sort of a lay of the land. And Chris, I'm going to throw to you, but let's just check and see how you sound before we launch into that.
Yeah. Can people hear me okay?
You're still kind of coming in and out a little bit.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback loop here.
Do you have headphones by chance?
Not here.
Okay,
This is minutes ago. Let me dive in as I can.
Okay.
Hang on a second. That's a good question here. So, as you mentioned, ocean plastics is something that we understand much better than freshwater plastics because we've been focusing on it for a much longer period of time. And a lot of what we actually know about freshwater plastics comes from our knowledge that have been derived from our looking at the ocean. So a lot of the modeling we do, for example, around the Great Lakes, to understand the problem is based on ocean problem. So what we have are estimates, really, because it's very early on. But the current understanding is that we put about 10 million kilograms of plastic into the Great Lakes every year, 22 million pounds. And everybody's familiar with the ocean gyres, those big giant garbage patches. Well, we have microplastic gyres in the Great Lakes, and the concentrations are every bit as high as they are in the ocean. So it's an equal but different problem, I think. And because it's so new, I think it's a really interesting area to be working on, because there's a whole lot to be done in terms of knowledge building as well as the action take to address it.
Okay. Suja, I know in your work, understanding what plastic pollution is has been a big focus. Do you want to add something here as well?
Well, I mean, when we think about plastic pollution, I mean, whether it is in freshwater or any aquatic systems, or if it is air, or if it is food, or even soil by itself, when we look at this, when we look at the chemistry of this is all just technically polymers. So when we think about polymers, one of the key things that has come out in the last couple of years as well is that these polymers, when they are nascent, as well as when they are in the nature and they start degrading, their chemistries can start to look different as well. And there are some great initiatives that are going on, basically, where folks are coming together to put this in a unique form, so that they can just understand how it looks when it is in nascent form, as well as how it is in the degraded form, because this allows us to learn more in depth. Because another aspect of looking at the plastic pollution right now is that it is the primary microplastics are there, but then these secondary microplastics, which are basically these plastics that are breaking down from these larger fractions, are becoming more and more. And that is something, a key issue that I think, like a consumer, as well as like a user of material, we ourselves have to be very, very concerned about. And that's where I think the regulations should start, that is with ourselves. So this is one thing that I kind of preach and believe in, is that when it comes to plastics, I think we have to prevent it. So it's like a prevention is better than cure here.
Okay, thank you. Jesse or Anna, would you like, either of you like to make a comment here?
Did you want to go first, Anna? Or?
I wanted to be polite and let you go first.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, God. Okay. Yes, just to emphasize, freshwater systems, lakes, rivers, creeks, etc. Those type of environments, compared to the ocean, of course, have been far less studied, but they have been studied in the context of acting as the channels to plastic pollution. So we do have evidence already that particularly lakes, of course, rivers, do receive large quantities of plastic litter. As Suja mentioned, the larger forms, the macroplastics, are an important component of the microplastics that we see in the environment, that get into the environment. It's estimated approximately 80% of microplastics come from the breakdown of larger plastic. Now, what's interesting, and I'm going to put this into the context of Canada and North America, because I noticed there's some folks from the US here as well, including Suja, is that one of the most common forms of microplastics that we find are microfibers. Even though on the emission scale, in terms of the mass flows of all the different types of plastics that we are emitting to the environment, they actually comprise a small percentage of those plastics, but yet they are most frequently reported by researchers in various studies, in sediments, in freshwater, and so on. And I think that really speaks to their unique fate in the environment and the threats that they may pose to our ecosystem. And Canadian study that was released last year, and I had the great pleasure to be a part of, and it was done in collaboration with the apparel companies, as well as researchers at the Ocean Conservation Association, where we looked at the releases of microfibers from our textiles being home laundry, looking at different materials to see how does it vary with material design. But we also did some estimates as to how much of those microfibers may be released at the scale of North America to the aquatic environment. So that's including lakes, freshwater, and collectively. So that work has shown, or it suggested that an average household in Canada and the US can produce approximately 5 million of microfibers per year. That amounts to 22,000 of microfibers that are entering our wastewater treatment facilities in North America. Following wastewater treatment, which for the most part is quite successful at capturing microfibers, but there's a downside to it, and I'm going to say that in just a moment. So after that treatment, we are looking at approximately 800, almost 900 tons of microfibers that are emitted into our Canadian and North American system. What happens to the majority of those microfibers? So the almost 18,000 tons, they're retained in municipal sludge. And it's a common practice for that sludge to be applied on agricultural lands. That, of course, there's a threat that those can as a source of microplastics to freshwater systems through runoff. And in fact, there is a Canadian work that has been done by researchers at Windsor University, the lab of Dr. Bill Crossman, that looked at that issue. And they did see significant amounts of microplastics on agricultural lands in Ontario, and they had some evidence that the runoff, there can be some transfer of those microplastics to water courses. So the problem is quite nuanced, and I think the last point that I wanted to make, because something that is often talked about as it relates to plastic, this is a global issue, but it's not, the impact vary, the sources, the flows, and the impact vary around the globe. And something that I often hear is that in those lower income countries, we see larger emissions of plastic pollution due to weaker waste management systems, whereas in countries like where we are, we have great management systems, and plastic pollution or leakage is less of a concern. But science does suggest that high-income countries like Canada are actually the greatest contributors of microplastics. So microfibers, tire wear, microbeads compared to the lower income countries around the world. So we have a great opportunity to address a large source of plastic pollution to the environment. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Anna. And sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
Okay, well, I'll just add to that. I think the challenge is quite large as well. And just sort of repeat a point that Chris made, it's the field is so new. There's a lot we still need to learn, especially about freshwater. So getting a better handle on sources, and how plastics are moving around our river systems and lakes, and also how we measure it and report it and record this data. It's all an area where we need more research. And then from just a citizen point of view, we're just using so much plastic now and such a small amount of it is recycled, and most of it ends up in landfill. That's a problem in and of its own. But on top of that, it's estimated, Environment Canada, in a report they did estimated 1%. So it seems like a small amount is escaping into the environment, but we're just using so much that it's really having a large, it's just a lot of plastic released to the environment. So the problem is big, and once it gets out into the environment, we still don't really know how we can clean it up, I guess. But like Anna said, there are points where there might be points along the system where we can do that, like wastewater treatment plants, for example.
Fantastic. All right, we have questions rolling in here. I'm going to proceed through with our next question, and then we'll kind of do like a questions from the audience break, if you will. All right, so plastics enter freshwater through various sources. What role can municipalities play in reducing plastic in our freshwater systems? I don't know, who would like to jump off in that one? Suka, is that you again, my friend? Suja, not Suka. She is a little bit frozen. We're good. Do you want to jump in on that one, Suja? I'm not sure if she can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Oh,
I can. Sorry, it was just not coming through for a few seconds.
Fair enough.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Sure. I was just saying plastics enter freshwater through various sources. What role can municipalities play in reducing plastics in our freshwater systems? And I suspect you'd all like to jump in on this.
Okay, got it. So one of the things, I mean, honestly, like it's that if we prevent these from getting in, that's where we have to do the basic work. Again, not an expert on the field of like recycling or in a matter of like even understanding how these things would enter. But one thing that if even as a consumer we can think about these things is, are things going at the right place at the right time? Then the chances of these things entering the environment is very minimum. So one of the things that was brought up is like the question of microfibers, which is so important. So, I mean, at this point, I mean, when the microfibers are released into the environment, I mean, from different sources, whether it is from our dryers or whether it is just from the clothing that we are wearing, or just general tear and wear, it's a tremendous amount that is entering. If technological advances can be made that these things either don't shred or we can trap them even before they are just entering into the system, that's where a lot of advances needs to come in.
Fantastic, thank you. And Chris, did you want to jump in too?
Yeah, sure. I think actually I'd make the same point, as you'd hope that it be managed upstream of the municipality in the first place. And that's where I think a lot of the emphasis is being placed. But I think municipalities can play a significant role, particularly in outreach and engagement. You know, they have all kinds of means at their disposal to actually reach out to people and educate them. You know, because there's water courses that usually flow through most of the municipalities I know anyways. There are opportunities to do some capture stuff and actually put it back in the face of the communities where it's being generated and show people this is what we're doing to our water courses. So I think that's meaningful for larger municipalities, and this is more of a thing for utilities, but for large municipalities that often have their own water utilities, you know, there is now, you know, modular technologies that could be put onto a wastewater treatment plant, and, you know, using things like flocculation, I think that's what it's called, right? Where you basically combine all those fibers and stuff, and you can take them out, and you can put them to other purposes. So I know, like, for example, in Germany, big chemical company BASF, they're doing that. They're literally taking all kinds of microplastics out of sewage and through advanced recycling, turning it into new products. So that's a potential role for municipalities too. But back to the original point, I hope we deal with the problem before it ever gets to, or I hope we'd focus more of the solutions before it ever gets into the hands of municipalities.
All right. I'm going to jump to our Ask a Question box because they're loading up here. Are they also coming in from wastewater treatment plants that bypass systems? Anna, you look like you're eager to maybe comment on that one.
Yes, so in our study, we estimated that that's about, but again, these are very rough estimates. that amounted to approximately 4,000 tons of microfibers in North America through septic tanks and combined sewer overflow discharge. And a non-Canadian study, so that was a study in the UK by Manchester University, where they have actually, their work provides some evidence that untreated wastewater leads to hotspots and sort of accumulations of microplastics in rivers, in the rivers that they studied in the UK. During dry weather, that's a problem because these microplastics effectively sort of diluted and flushed downstream, and they appear to be accumulating in those systems. So, and the recommendation was to avoid wastewater, untreated wastewater emissions, which we should do in general, but particularly during dry weather, where we can have these severe accumulations of microplastics. And of course, the impacts on the biota are unknown, but we can start making some connections and hypotheses around that when we have such concentrations of microplastics with mixtures of contaminants we really don't understand. And I guess another concern around with regards to emission and discharge of microplastics is that unlike other contaminants, dissolved contaminants, they're not really subject to dilution. So so we have to be really mindful that we're dealing with these solid substances that will either accumulate in the river or will get flushed, but they will effectively not really disappear in the sense that other contaminants might be incorporated into the water system. So avoiding emission of untreated wastewater during dry weather, that is certainly one action that municipalities could consider as one of their toolbox of solutions to address microplastics.
Okay, thank you. For our next question, I think Suja already kind of addressed this a little bit, but maybe we can dig in a bit more. The plastic-based fabrics we wear yield a lot of fine plastic particles. What has your research telling us, or what is your research telling us on the significant fabrics we wear and the microplastics? Maybe, I don't know, Jesse, if this is something that's been coming up in part of your research as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's, can you hear me okay, or is it chopping up? It's a bit.
We can hear you okay.
Okay. My end. Oh, sorry, my screen's jumping around there. But, yeah, so definitely the microfibers, the microplastics from fibers, presumably coming from our clothing, are by far the most common type of plastic we find in rivers and wastewater effluent. It's about 90 to 95% of all the microplastic pieces are these microfibers. So it's a huge component in terms of pieces of plastic, not necessarily weight, but pieces of plastic. And the other thing with the microfibers that I think we're just learning is just how easily they're also transported in the atmosphere, and that becomes even a much more difficult problem to control in terms of plastic pollution, because it's essentially these microfibers are then just become everywhere, and they don't really have a point source that you can use some sort of engineering solution to sort of help remove them. And I think that's becoming more evident, that there's been a couple studies now with atmospheric deposition of microfibers, and I know unpublished research that's currently underway that they're estimating something about, again, on the order of like 90% of all the microfibers are in a river are probably coming through atmospheric deposition. But those studies aren't finalized yet, but it's just a huge component. But it's also amazing, if you go to a wastewater treatment plant and look what's coming into the wastewater treatment plant, it's amazing how much plastic is moving through our wastewater system as well. So the bigger plastics that most of them would remove, with a grate or something similar, but they're filling up, dumpsters of plastic, a few dumpsters a week just going to landfill. And that doesn't include, which goes back to Anna's point, why it's important to avoid releasing untreated sewage into a river, because so much is moving through it already. And the treatment process, does, if you have, the flocculation techniques that Chris was talking about, or even like the Ottawa treatment plant where I am, it is removing a lot of the microplastics into the biosolids, but like Anna said, just so much is going through it that still a large number is getting into the river through effluent. But then those biosolids have a lot of plastic in them, a lot of little plastic pieces as well. And we're currently doing a study, again, it's underway and unpublished, but where we're doing a survey of the plastic concentration in biosolids, and we're finding, hundreds up to just over 1,000 pieces of microplastic per gram dry weight of biosolids. So it's just a huge sort of pool of microplastics, and a lot of that is the microfibers coming from our.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here for Chris. I can't have a speak today. What is Pollution Probe asking governments to do to manage microplastics? And I think this also kind of leads into a question we have about what we anticipate in terms of regulatory pressures as well. So maybe Chris, you can start us off here.
Yeah. So, well, thanks. That's a great question. The stuff that we're doing and relating to government it covers the entire value chain of plastics. And so some of them are long terms, like we're very much, we're part of the Canadian Plastics Pact and other fora that we're trying to create a circular economy that will require both federal and provincial, legislation, regulation, etc. We were one of the principal lobbyists, or one of the principal organizations lobbying for the revamp of Ontario's Blue Box program. We helped create it back in the 70s, but we said it's not adequate anymore. So, that's part of making sure that there's consistency across the whole province, and no matter where you are, you can recycle the same things in your Blue Box. You can't do that right now. I've got family in Cobourg. I live in Toronto. The recycling programs are completely different. So we're going to, and starting the end of next year, you'll have consistency of all the things that you recycle. You will have way more things that you can put into your blue bin. And it's all being paid, and it's going to be paid for by the producers, right? It's an extended producer responsibility system. So, all those manufacturers of plastic goods have to pay and operate that system, which should hopefully, this is not really a government action, but when it's on their dime, the hope is, and there's some evidence from Europe and others that this does happen, is it's going to change the way they think about the design of their products in the first place. So you start to design more waste out of the system. So there's a good part, but I was going to save this for later, but the work that we do through the Great Lakes Plastic Cleanup and all our partners, a lot of that is the learnings are, you turn that into actions, right? So one of the things we found we get find a lot of dock foam, because people use styrofoam to do floating docks. So we were finding a lot of that in our capture devices. And so an MPP from Muskoka here in Ontario, he got wind of that. He's cottage country, right? So he put a private member's bill that said he wants to ban the use of unencapsulated foam for floating docks. And that actually became law, I think, back in March or May. And, but there's other things we're finding, like we find pre-production plastic pellets. So, these are the pellets they send to the plastic manufacturers. They melt down those pellets and they turn it into, whatever it is, a plastic bottle or whatever that is. Well, we find lots of those in the water as well. So we were able to actually turn that into, we went to the plastics industry, which is now part of the chemistry industry in Canada, and said, hey, we're seeing this all around. We want to take some action. We were proposing a reg, and they said, that's great. We'll work with it. We'd be happy. We'd like to work with you to propose a reg to the province to make sure that doesn't happen. And so we're working on that. But in the first instance, they said, a reg is a minimum standard. What if we created the best management system in the world and for all our members made it mandatory, right? So that you don't have this stuff escaping from your sites or in transportation, whatever like that. So it's called Operation Clean Sleep. It was an existing program that really had no teeth, no transparency, no accountability. So we worked with the industry to actually, once the chemistry industry took over the plastics industry here, we worked with them to create this new program, which is mandatory. And so it's a good chunk. It's like the big companies are all members of this. And this is a mandatory program that they have to do. It has to be third-party audited, all that kind of stuff. So they have to show you that you have all the management systems and the technologies in place to make sure you're not losing this stuff from your sites or in the movement between sites. So there's sort of big system. So the summary is we're doing stuff that's big system change, pushing a circular economy, but we're also looking for what are those immediate opportunities, because changing a whole system takes a long time. So what are the immediate opportunities from what we're finding in the water where you can get sort of the low-hanging fruit and demonstrate this progress and show momentum? Because I think one of the things for all of us that work on these issues, any environmental issues, like you can get fatigue when they go too long and you don't see progress. So I think one of the best ways actually to motivate people to do more is to say, yeah, actually we can tackle this and we can make
Thank you. I think, Anna, last week when we spoke, you mentioned something about being held back by lack of legislation. What kind of things can we do without having those regulations in place?
And I think Chris really hit the nail on a number of ideas here, including the low-hanging fruits. So how can we alleviate the problem and be part of the solution in our own communities at a local level? And I think before I actually go into that, I'd like to emphasize that, and as Chris mentioned, it's really about a systems change that will require multiple levels of government action, industry action, and also municipalities. So it's not just about municipalities. This is a one puzzle in the larger things, in the larger sort of puzzle work that needs to happen in order to address and solve plastic and microplastic pollution challenges. But one thing that I find quite exciting about addressing microplastics and plastics at a local level is that there are a number of solutions, waste management, some technical solutions that are already available, that have been applied to manage other pollutants, and they have been piloted and demonstrated that they can successfully also capture and retain microplastics before they get into our stormwater, sewers, or water courses. So here I'm thinking about green infrastructure solutions, bioretention tanks, permeable pavements, rain gardens. There's a great study by Dr. Chelsea Rockman at the University of Toronto. I'll post a link in just a moment, where they looked at the capture efficiency of rain gardens in San Francisco Bay, I believe it was, of microplastics alongside metals, and I think there were PCBs in there as well. So you could potentially address multiple pollutants with one solution at a local level. So I think I would encourage for different locations, different regions to really look into those kind of easy wins, as you will, to implement and to mitigate the problem. The other exciting interventions that, again, they're not solutions because they're delaying plastics getting into the environment, but again, help alleviate the problem, are more technological. So filters in storm drains have been trialed, litter box, I think it's called, with some success. There are catch basins, sea bins. That's an initiative spearheaded by University of Toronto, and they're being trialed in British Columbia as well. So there are these various small, I mean, in some cases they're not always small, but these easy wins that could be implemented to intervene, to intercept plastic pollution before it gets into our environment. But they also come with educational opportunities. And in the case of sea bins, for instance, I know that University of Toronto uses it as a capture mechanism, but also outreach and a citizen science sort of data collection opportunity to engage, but also learn about what type of plastics are getting into the environment that we can inform effective policy, whether it's local or federal. So yeah, environmental management practices and solutions. There are lots of opportunities there.
That's fantastic. I'd love to open it up to the rest of the panel. What are some examples of projects and initiatives that are currently leading the way for reducing the amount of plastics that are in our freshwater systems? And what are some of the factors that have led to their success? So let's, kind of like to hear some of the success stories a little bit. I know, Chris, I think you've been working alongside some of these companies, and certainly Jesse, I think you as well may have some thoughts here, and I'm sure Suja too. So who would like to jump in?
Well, I think maybe because Anna was just talking about Chelsea Rockman, that's a good segue into mine, because we work very closely with Dr. Rockman. But I'd mentioned it before, so some of this is going to be reiteration. Last year, we created this program called the Great Lakes Plastic Cleanup, and we use two technologies. One are called lithtraps, so they're basically a net that sits inside a storm drain. So every time it rains and plastic and other stuff runs down there, it doesn't end up in the water, it gets captured. And that we also use these things called sea bins. So they look like trash cans that sit in the water, but they behave kind of like a vacuum. It's passive suction, but they take in about 25,000 liters an hour. And so they will skim the surface all around them and collect all kinds of marine debris, but plastics are a big part of that. What we do with that, though, is, we have 26 locations right now. Next year, we're moving over to the American side. We'll have about 50 locations. But, it doesn't take you a lot of math when you sit there and, I think right now best case scenario, we could probably remove 28,000 kilograms a year of plastic. That's a drop in the bucket compared to that 10 million kilograms I mentioned that we put in every year. But what it does provide is a really great opportunity to do research and to inform other actions. So we do waste characterizations of everything we capture, and a lot of times we'll take that and turn it into something that engages the community to discuss it. Right? It may be a display, it may be a piece of art, whatever. But we also use those findings to understand, if you're looking at the stuff that you've collected and you realize, 80% of that is litter. Well, in that community, that maybe, an anti-trash campaign or whatever is a logical response. But if you're finding stuff that's similar across the whole ecosystem, for example, well, that's maybe a regulatory action that the province needs to take, or maybe there's a federal action that they need to do because of commitments under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, that kind of stuff. So it's and so I already kind of mentioned a couple of the hits that we've had, right? But actually another interesting thing is, you collect a whole bunch of stuff at the end of the day. What do you do with it? Most of it, it's not recyclable, at least in our normal mechanical recycling processes. So we've got this interesting project that we're launching with the Toronto Zoo and an advanced recycling company called Green Mantra. And what we're doing is we're taking all this really kind of nasty plastics that you're getting out of the Great Lakes, everything from macroplastics to microplastics, through advanced recycling, which is chemical recycling. Well, it's using heat and stuff like that to recycle it and turn it into a new product. But we're creating a thing at the zoo. It's an educational opportunity called the Plastic Pathway. It will be a physical loop, through a tour through the loop that goes through the entire value chain of the plastics value chain. And at every point along the way, it will say, here are the sort of the environmental, and here's the benefits of why we do this. Here are the environmental and conservation impacts, and here are some of the solutions that people are working on. So you can learn all that, but this actual pathway, the paving is all going to be recycled plastic. The benches that people are going to sit on is all advanced recycling. The signage, everything, right? So we're actually taking stuff that is only, if you can get it, it's only been traditionally a place that a landfill could deal with it, and we're turning it into something completely new. So I think that's kind of exciting. So there's two things that we're working on that I think are actually really positive. And the great thing about, sorry, I was just going to say, the great thing about, a big part of this is education and outreach. Well, you work with a place like the Toronto Zoo, they have 1.2 million people that, in non-COVID years, that walk through that place every year. But they also, this is going to be a virtual as well as a physical tour. So their online presence is ridiculous. I dream that Pollution Probe could have that kind of outreach. So when you work with a partner like that, you've got so many people that you can influence.
That's fantastic.
Sorry, I kind of went on a little bit.
No, clearly that's a passion project for you. Awesome. Jesse.
I just want to add, I was just going to say, just following on Anna and Chris's comments, we have a CBIN here in Ottawa as well at the Nepean Sailing Club with an NGO called Deep Blue Cleanup. And we just have the one right now, but it removes, a couple of kilograms of plastic from the Ottawa River over the course of the summer. And like Chris was saying, and Anna, it's really great educational opportunity. So that's a lot what the NGO works with, is with schools and getting the message out around that. So, it's probably not full technological solution to clean up the river. You probably, better, well, I don't know if there's better options out there, but hopefully we'll develop some better options, to prevent the plastic from getting in the river in the first place. But it's a great educational tool, at least to see, to show kids and the public. So it's been really neat that way.
That's fantastic. From a slightly different perspective, what are the opportunities for technologies and technology providers for tackling plastics in freshwater? Everybody's super keen, or I think Anna was keen to talk about this one. Oh, she's muted.
There we go. I clicked on the wrong button and it sent me to a different place. I will go back to microfibers because it's a topic that's close to my line of work. And we talked about the different ways in which the different levels of intervention that are needed, and that there's no single intervention or solution that is perfect, and either it'll delay microplastics or plastic disposal in the environment, or it's not really reduction strategy. So it's really important that any technological solutions goes alongside those upstream changes in material design and in product design, manufacturing and production practices for textiles, for instance. And again, I will relate this to technology. One of the greatest unknowns right now is the extent to which textile factories and manufacturing facilities are releasing microfibers to the environment, but we have a reason to believe that it's likely to be significant. So solutions for that, in that context, technological solutions to treat and prevent waste being released at the manufacturing level, that's one opportunity. Most of these factories are not in Canada. They're on a different continent, but it's interesting to note that many of us are probably wearing clothes that have come from that location. So plastic pollution is truly a transboundary issue. It's a global issue, and we not only have to do things in our own locations, but also need to be part of, if we want to address the problem, it's important to be part of this global network of solutions that need to happen to address microplastics. So that's the factories. The other technological intervention that I believe could be quite is an opportunity to the Canadian innovation sector and technology sectors are household-based interventions and treatments. So we do have these traps that can be installed on washing machines that retain filters. Now, of course, what do you do with that, with those fibers, and how effective individuals are at sort of handling those traps and dealing with that waste properly, so that it doesn't actually inadvertently end up in the environment. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to look for solutions that help treat grey water at household level before it gets into the wastewater treatment plant, where I think it's going to be a lot more expensive to introduce a technology intervention to address the few percent of microplastics that aren't treated with the conventional wastewater treatment. Yeah, that's it for me.
Perfect. We have just about 9 minutes left here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our questions from the audience. And we have 4 votes for what are specific municipal level and provincial level plastic waste management and resource protection policies within Canada that affect addressing and or tackling plastics in freshwater. It's kind of a big question, but a good one. Oops.
That was a really big question. Could you ask that? Could you repeat that?
I sure can. And even if you hit your question box there on the bottom of your screen, you can look at it too. I don't know.
What number is it?
It's the first one there. It's got 4 votes next to it. It's what are specific municipal level and provincial level plastic waste management and resource protection policies within Canada that affect addressing and or tackling plastics in freshwater? And here's the panel here. Give them a second to digest the question. It's a good one.
Okay.
I feel like we should have Jeopardy music going.
Well, I mean, maybe you can jump in first with just a general comment. I think until fairly recently, very few jurisdictions of any order had sort of policy in place that was specifically plastics related. This is a very new thing. So, but there are existing things. I see, like Patricia has put up, some stuff about the Fisheries Act and their sewer use bylaws and stuff like that. These things can be used to address it, but there's very little that specifically was designed to deal with plastics entering our water. So, and the new ones, federally, in SEPA, which I think this is going to be challenged, but they've made plastic toxic, designated plastic as toxic, and that gives them the ability to actually regulate some things. They also banned a few types of plastics, straws, things like that, single-use. I'm not sure how well that one's going to work, or if it's going to work out, because I'm not sure it actually meets the toxicity test. I think they've they should have probably done something more purpose-built, rather than try to take a piece of legislation that wasn't designed to deal with it and kind of bend it to try and address plastic. But then you've got the provinces. Anna's in BC, Ontario. We both have our municipal recycling programs now. The one that's coming online in Ontario, they're very, very similar. So BC's, I think your, Recycle BC that's like five years old now or something like that. They've seen their recycling rates just go way up. They were like everybody else, pretty low recycling rates. And now, the targets are a little different for every category that they're dealing with. But, a lot of the plastics are up over 70% recycled now. And, the targets will keep going up. And they haven't had difficulty making those 5-year targets at all. So the target's going to go up. So you're going to see more and more recovered. I think, there's I see Carrie Freak has made a comment there. Hi, Carrie, nice to see you. But microbeads, that was the first one. that was I mean, that was a no-brainer. I mean, even the people that were manufacturing microbeads and putting them in whatever toothpaste and facial scrubs and everything, they just kind of went, when people got sort of outraged about it, they went, yeah, that's really dumb. There's a whole bunch of other things that can be used for exactly the same purpose. So that was a really easy ban that was effective because both industry and government were exactly on the same page and would support the same action. So yeah, there are a few actions that different orders of government. I don't know of any. Do you folks know anything specific to municipalities? That's one I don't know as well.
I can perhaps shed some light here. Something that I've learned recently about so we have in Canada, our government has introduced this Canada-wide strategy to achieve zero waste on plastic, zero plastic waste by 2030. And of course, SEPA was one, adding plastics to SEPA was one kind of activity that went into that, looking at what materials can be eliminated, like single-use plastics. And I also know that one element of that strategy is to develop guidelines for managing plastics and microplastics at a local level in wastewater and stormwater. So so there appears to be some kind of intent to come up with some solutions there. I think one of the challenge for plastics and microplastics is that we're dealing with a suite of materials, and particularly for microplastics, those certain types of these microplastics have distinct sort of pathways to the environment. So they're not all equally sort of emitted across different pathways, via different pathways. So let me provide some examples. For instance, we now know that microfibers are more important in wastewater. On the other hand, in stormwater, road wear and tire wear is more important. So it's important to kind of put those sort of nuances to how we're managing microplastics at a local level. And to add one more complication to this is that even although there's limited research on that right now, but I wouldn't be surprised. And that's the relative magnitude of these pathways. So say stormwater, wastewater, river and discharge, and so on, can vary from watershed to watershed. And that's because, of course, well, I suspect we have different management practices, we have different uses of microplastics, we have different infrastructure in place. So that's also important to keep in mind, that when we are monitoring, which I think was another question that I'm probably segueing to, is that it will be difficult to think about just one compartment that we would measure to address the problem, because there's such a variety of materials, also the different ways in which they can get into the environment.
Thank you. We have got about 2 minutes left, and I'd love to get a final thought from each of you to share before the end of our discussion. If there's any point you'd like to really reiterate, or I think we've done a fantastic job today of pasting just about every link under the stars related to this topic in our chat here. So a great resource. But I'll start with you, Chris. Any final thoughts? You get 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I think it's, this is such a new, freshwater plastic pollution is such a new issue. I find it encouraging to see that things are already happening. I find it encouraging to see the breadth of activity that's going on. I love, being in a forum like this, and I learn from other panelists all this stuff that as much as I think I know, is how little I know. It's great, but I'll just point out back to the Great Lakes plastic cleanup thing again, right? It's only been a year that's been in existence, but it's the biggest thing in the world of its kind, and it's amazing. And the one thing I didn't point out, I mean, you can talk about the technologies, you can talk about the research, you can talk about all this stuff, but the real thing that makes this work, and I think this is what everybody has to look at when it comes to plastics, because it's everywhere, it's coming from everywhere, we're all part of the problem and we're all part of the solution. But this thing is, it's founded by the Council of the Great Lakes Region and Pollution Pro, but there's a massive number of partners, right? We've got government partners, we've got private sector partners. I mentioned Chelsea Rockman and U of T Trash Team, but we have other universities, colleges, we've got service groups and other environmental groups. when you've got that kind of a cloud, right? We have industry associations, the boating association. When you've got all these sort of unlikely bedfellows all coming together, a common purpose, you'll have impact. And that's why, I think when we show up to the Ontario government, and it's not like it's gone particularly smooth because they have some concerns about it. So when you show up and you say, hey, listen, we'd like to get this regulated, it makes sense. And you've got that kind of breadth of support behind you, they kind of have to take it seriously. So I was just going to say, don't ever forget the value of all your partnerships, because they really, that's going to be part of the success.
Thank you, Chris. All right, Suja, how about you?
Yeah, I think Chris just summarized what I would have said too. I mean, this is that one issue. What we have seen here as well in US is like where you have seen researchers come together, but at the same time, all the government institutions come together, universities, and even companies like ours come together to work towards a solution for not just identification, but also to bring in a platform for folks to exchange ideas and also collaborate and create the next level of identification tools, as well as next level of solutions for recycling these materials. So it's the partnership that would be the key, just like Chris has mentioned.
Thank you. And Jesse?
I'm just going to, I guess, repeat what the last two said, because that's what really stands out to me is how this is a new problem, relatively new and recognized as a new problem, but just how engaged the public is with it. And that's pushing the government to be engaged and industry to be engaged with it. So for an environmental problem, I've been really impressed by how quickly, actions are being taken, whether that's from NGOs or government or even industry. Typically with environmental problems, decades of research are required and showing it's a problem, and people are pulled to the table kicking and screaming sometimes. But with this, there seems to be a lot of support, and I think that's due to the public engagement, and that's probably due to what Chris said about it's obvious to the public that this is a problem that we should try and fix. People understand what plastic is. We use it all the time, and all day long we're using tons of plastic. People understand it, and they don't want this litter in our waterways.
Great, thank you so much, Jesse. All right, Anna, bring us home.
Bring us home on this question. Sorry, could you prompt me
it's
again?
just basically a wrap up. Your final thought for the day. We're actually a couple minutes over, but certainly if there's any key point that you'd like to reiterate for today's discussion that you'd like to leave people with.
Yeah, just to emphasize the great ideas and issues that have been touched on by all of the speakers, which is that we need collaboration. Public engagement is certainly on the rise. I've been floored with the level of engagement, and I think for the most part, people really want to address the problem. It's just that it seems to be overwhelming. It seems to be everywhere, and it's very, very important to break it down, but also set conditions so that people can start addressing it in ways that fits their conditions. Meaning, the solutions can't be equal across the society, because not everyone is in the same position to purchase sustainable products or do that kind of change. But so there are tools that we should be given to the public so that they can help change, address single-use plastics and other materials. But we also need to set frameworks and policies in place that allow for people to make those choices a lot more easier, because right now it's just far cheaper to get things that are overpackaged accessibility of items that have low plastic footprint is just very low at the moment. So policy will be very important on that front. And as a final note, I'm very excited about all the research that's happening across Canada right now to better understand the sources and pathways and impacts of plastics and microplastics in different watersheds. And I think in the next few years, 5 years, 3 years, we're really going to have better clarity on how to address this problem at a local level. And that research happens in collaboration with municipalities. There's a project in British Columbia that we're part of that involves local municipalities who are interested in seeing how they can adapt their infrastructure and their management practices to address the problem. So it's very inspiring to see that proactive approach being taken across Canada. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. And well, thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a really informative discussion, and I get the sense that we may have only just scratched the surface. We may need to talk about this for many more hours to come. And a big thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Thermo Fisher and the Global Water Institute. And a big thank you to all of our attendees. Your interest and participation through the chat feature and all the questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. They go a long way of infusing these virtual events with a real sense of community. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Natasha, our awesome event manager here at Actual Media, has reminded me that we are to mark our calendars for June 1st through to the 3rd, 2022 for the Canadian Water Summit and REMTech East in Niagara Falls, Ontario. More details will be coming soon, so keep an eye out for those at watersummit.ca. Follow Actual Media up at the top of your screen and you'll automatically receive notifications for our upcoming webinar series kicking off in the new year. So thank you again, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.